He who does not understand history is doomed to repeat it. Truer words have never been spoken, and in America for the last 2 weeks, we've seen gangs of people who are obsessed with tearing down statues, tearing down American history. And of course, it's ironic because the reason they want to tear this history down is they're very ignorant of it. And all they know is, well, this guy owned a slave, and because of that, he was bad. And history is broken into segments where this guy was bad and this guy is good. But of course, history is much more nuanced than that. The world was a very different place in the 1800s, 1700s, the 1600s. And academia and the media, they don't want you to take a deep look at history to understand the historical relevance of these historical figures. And a great example of this ignorance is the people who want to tear down these statues call themselves anti-fascist, but they don't understand fascism. They're anti-fascist, but what they're doing by its very nature, the suppression of opposition, is fascism. So a group of people also want to take down a statue of Lenin in Seattle. Well, I say leave the statue up because I understand that the historical relevance of Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution and the Red Scare and political opponents being cleansed, executed, their families being executed, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 million people imprisoned, executed for daring to oppose the state, collectivism. I understand that fascism was an offshoot of Marxism. It's just another form of collectivism, state worship, because collectivism has always been the problem. Because under collectivism, whether that be communism or fascism, the state is put ahead of the individual. And if the state is put ahead of the individual, the state has justification to kill the individual who challenges the state. And freedom is eroded. And that's why under all these ideologies, the first thing they always do is take the gun so that the individuals cannot fight back. Collectivism has always been the problem. And if you were an anti-fascist, what you would understand is that the way to combat collectivism, whether that be communism, whether that be fascism, is to put the individual above the state, which is what this country, the ideas this country was founded on. Now, the country did not practice what it preached, right? I mean, black individuals were not put ahead of the state. The state made them property, and this was inhumane and immoral and wrong. But America and all of the West has thankfully corrected this injustice, whereas there's still 50 million slaves in the world, many of them in Middle Eastern countries and in Africa. But the West corrected this issue and eventually got to the principles where the individual is ahead of the state. Now, the West hasn't been perfect. It hasn't always practiced what it preached, but the idea of the individual being ahead of the state is the only way that people can be free, because without it, the state has authority to kill the individual that goes against the state. So if you want to be an anti-fascist, the answer is and always has been individualism. The government serves the individual. This is a government by the people, not a government, not a state-run authority like fascism and communism. So if you want to be an anti-fascist, stand up for freedom of speech. Even if you disagree with people, let them speak their mind. Stand up for freedom of assembly. Even if you disagree with people, allow them to assemble. Stand up for gun rights. Even if gun makes you nervous, understand that the greatest threat to your freedom is not individual people, but is the state. It always has been. History shows that. As I said, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 million people. 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, 150 million people murdered in the name of collectivism. And until we understand these historical truths, we're not going to get back to freedom. But of course, you want to talk about fascism. Well, fascism is defined by dictatorial powers, a partnership between industry and government, and the suppression of opposition. Well, partnership between industry and government, who controls the media? Who controls all of the mainstream media? Who controls Facebook? Who controls Twitter? Who controls the American education system? Sure looks like the collectivists do. The suppression of opposition, like the mainstream media convincing large segments of the public that anyone who's right of progressive must be a Nazi or a KKK member, even though, as I stated, the definition of fascism has been changed because it was always a left-wing ideology. So the reason they do this is to demonize anyone who's not a progressive, not a leftist, in the eyes of young leftists who don't understand history, so that people who are conservatives and libertarians come off as, or are viewed as, less than human, and because they're less than human, violence can be used to suppress their free speech, which is why conservatives and libertarians haven't been permitted to speak on college campuses for over a year, because they're met with violence and force, the suppression of opposition. And then this is given justification by the mainstream media, which is completely controlled by collectivists, by academia, which is completely controlled by collectivists, by social networking, which is completely controlled by collectivists. This is more aligned with what fascism actually is. So I implore you, stop trying to destroy history and attempt to understand history, because it is only through the understanding of history that we are not doomed to repeat it.